The diesel engine of the crew transport rumbled beneath my boots, shaking the thick soot off my heavy fire-retardant jacket. The smell of ash and burning pine still clung to my skin after 14 days on the fire line. In the pitch black of the cabin, the sudden harsh glow of my cell phone screen was blinding. A text message from my father. Trevor. Sat waiting at 11:51 at night. Make sure you do not wear your dress uniform tomorrow. Marcus's family expects elite society, not glorified park rangers. Stay out of the photos. 2 seconds later, another notification flashed across the cracked glass. My sister, Courtney. Loved the message. I swallowed the dry ash in my throat and stared down at the fresh, raw burn blisters covering my calloused hands. I ran my thumb over the torn skin, locked the device, and plunged the cabin back into total darkness. Tomorrow was the hyper-exclusive mountain wedding, and I knew exactly what I was going to wear. The Aspen Lodge was a fortress of imported crystal chandeliers, vaulted ceilings, and cascading white orchids. Within 3 minutes of my arrival, Courtney walked straight toward me, her eyes locked on my only clean civilian dress. She tilted her wrist. A full glass of dark red wine cascaded down the front of my clothes. The smirk on her face was absolute perfection. Our mother, Erica, rushed across the marble floor. She did not bring a towel. She shoved a cheap, polyester maid's uniform into my chest. Erica demanded I put it on immediately, insisting I blend in with the hired help to avoid embarrassing the billionaire Sullivan family with my presence. I looked at the crumpled polyester in my hands, and my mind snapped back to the reality of why I had spent the last 2 weeks risking my life in a burning forest. $100,000. That was the exact amount my grandmother had left in a protected trust for my future. It was gone. Trevor was secretly drowning in massive debt, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of generational wealth to impress the Sullivan dynasty. Courtney's luxury vegan skincare company was about to default on a massive commercial loan that Trevor had co-signed. A default meant a lien on their house, a shattered credit score, and a ruined aesthetic. The Sullivans would have canceled the wedding the second they realized my family was broke. To save their fragile empire, Trevor exploited a very specific 48-hour window when the Forest Service listed my crew as entirely off-grid, with zero communication capabilities. He used a sleazy family friend notary to forge my signature on a power of attorney document. He walked into the bank, played the panicked father, and pushed an emergency wire transfer directly into Courtney's limited liability company. They stole my future to buy aesthetic packaging and fake social media followers. They laughed at me, assuming I was just a naive manual laborer. They had absolutely zero idea that my forensic accountant friend had already matched the fraudulent notary stamp directly to my official deployment logs. The federal wire fraud was completely documented, packaged, and ready to detonate. I dropped the cheap maid's uniform onto the floor and unzipped my heavy garment bag. The crisp, navy blue Class A fire service dress uniform caught the light, the polished brass buttons gleaming like loaded ammunition. Trevor cornered me in the hallway before I could even reach the main hall. The corridor smelled intensely of fresh orchids and the sour reek of his nervous sweat. He pointed a trembling finger at my chest, viciously threatening to call the Aspen police and falsely accuse me of stealing wedding gifts if I took one single step into the ceremony. He grabbed my shoulder and physically shoved me toward the back of the venue, forcing me into the sweltering catering tent. He ordered me to stay completely out of sight. I offered zero resistance. I walked into the shadows and stood among the stacks of dirty catering dishes. Toxic families always hide the scapegoat. They must isolate the one person whose gritty, authentic reality threatens their purchased identities. My calloused hands and soot-stained boots were dangerous because they exposed the absolute hollow nature of their fake wealth. They thought banishing me to the catering tent was a punishment. They failed to realize my silence was a meticulously calculated trap. I waited in the humid darkness. The phone in my pocket vibrated against my leg. A single text message from my fire chief illuminated the screen. Convoy is 2 minutes out. Hold the line. The sweeping chords of the wedding march echoed through the cavernous lodge. Courtney strutted down the center aisle, wrapped in thousands of dollars of imported lace. basking in the manufactured attention of the regional elite. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall violently shoved open. This was not a brawl or a chaotic disruption. A detail of state troopers marched through the threshold 3 minutes ahead of the main convoy. They moved with terrifying, absolute authority, legally suspending the venue's private security detail under a state official security protocol. The arrogant wedding planner immediately recognized the immense legal liability crashing down on her business. She grabbed her radio headset, her face draining of color. She ordered her staff to stand down and pack up the kitchen immediately, loudly declaring she was absolutely not getting sued by the state. She abandoned the Bennett family right when they needed her most, proving that in the world of high society aesthetics, loyalty only lasts as long as the final check clears. The doorway was clear. 50 soot-stained, battle-hardened smoke jumpers wearing pristine dress uniforms marched into the hall. The synchronized, heavy tread of their polished boots against the marble floor drowned out the string quartet. They formed an impenetrable, silent honor guard corridor straight down the center aisle, completely boxing in the wealthy guests and hijacking the entire aesthetic of the ceremony. The state governor walked through the doors. Flanked by his security detail, he bypassed the terrified billionaires in the front rows. I stepped out of the catering tent and walked into the blinding light of the chandeliers. Trevor's face turned a sickly, translucent gray. Courtney froze at the altar, her panicked eyes darting around the room as she realized every single camera lens had turned away from her imported dress and focused entirely on the soot-stained boots of the woman she tried to erase. The paradox flipped instantly. The silent sacrifice completely eclipsed the loud vanity. Marcus snapped into a blind, narcissistic rage. The arrogant groom realized his perfect society wedding was ruined, and his fragile ego demanded blood. He grabbed the lapels of his own custom tuxedo jacket and violently ripped the fabric. He grabbed a gilded chair and smashed it against the marble floor, shattering the wood. He pulled out his phone and dialed the Aspen police, screaming hysterically that my crew had trespassed and physically assaulted him. The police chief arrived minutes later. Stepping through the corridor of smoke jumpers, Marcus stood at the altar, fixing his cuffs and smirking, entirely confident that his generational wealth and aggressive lies guaranteed an instant victory. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply raised my hand and pointed a single finger at the ceiling. The lodge was equipped with a discreet, high-definition, 4K security dome camera hidden among the wooden rafters. The police chief demanded the lodge manager hand over the security tablet. The pristine video footage instantly showed Marcus staging the entire crime, destroying the property and ripping his own clothes while my crew stood perfectly still. The chief pulled his handcuffs from his belt before the metal could click around Marcus's wrists. The governor stepped into the center of the room. He turned his back on the weeping bride and the terrified parents. He pinned the State Medal of Valor directly onto my chest, his voice booming across the silent hall, honoring me for single-handedly saving a trapped school bus during the catastrophic backcountry wildfires. The heavy bronze medal rested against my uniform, cold and undeniable. Then, I dropped the final, devastating kill shot. I looked directly at Marcus and exposed the $100,000 wire fraud. I detailed the forged notary stamp, the stolen trust, and the desperate loan default. Marcus's smirk evaporated, replaced by sheer, unadulterated horror. He had rushed to sign the marriage certificate exactly 1 hour before the ceremony began, aggressively refusing a prenuptial agreement because he wanted to project total dominance. I watched the realization crush the air out of his lungs. He was now legally tethered to Courtney's limited liability company, a company holding stolen assets, currently under an active federal investigation for wire fraud. Arthur Sullivan, the 75-year-old billionaire grandfather, slowly stood up from his VIP seat in the front row. He was a ruthless, self-made man who despised weakness and superficiality. He looked at Marcus with absolute, freezing contempt. Arthur's voice cut through the room like a combat knife, publicly severing Marcus from the Sullivan family trust on the spot. He officially disinherited his grandson to protect the larger Sullivan empire from the impending federal asset forfeiture. abandoning Marcus to the legal wolves his own arrogance had created. The fallout was swift and merciless. The elite guests, sensing the catastrophic stench of federal indictments and public scandal, literally ran for the side exits. They grabbed their expensive coats and abandoned the Bennett family entirely. The police chief slammed Marcus against the altar, clicking the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists for filing a false police report and staging a crime. Trevor and Erica collapsed onto the polished marble floor, weeping hysterically, utterly destroyed by the reality of the federal wire fraud charges looming over their heads. They possessed absolutely zero high society friends left to bail them out. Courtney dropped to her knees, shrieking in her ruined lace dress, totally abandoned by her now broke groom. I did not gloat. I did not offer them a single word of closure. I simply turned my back. I walked out the heavy oak doors, flanked by 50 loyal brothers and sisters in uniform, leaving my biological family to choke permanently on the miserable ashes of their own staggering arrogance. The drive down the mountain was completely silent. The heavy diesel engine hummed, and the cold bronze of the Medal of Valor pressed against my chest. As I watched the city lights flicker in the valley below, the adrenaline faded, leaving behind a sharp, profound clarity. Toxic families do not view their children as human beings. They view them as aesthetic props and financial commodities. They demand absolute obedience and punish any independence that does not directly serve their vanity. Mourning parents who are still alive is a brutal, agonizing process, but it is the only way to survive the fire. 6 months later, the legal trap snapped shut with devastating finality. Trevor and Erica pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud and identity theft to avoid a massive public trial. The judge sentenced them both to 4 years in state prison. The court ordered them to pay $142,000 in total restitution and punitive fines. Courtney's luxury company was entirely liquidated by federal auditors, her social reputation completely annihilated. Marcus avoided jail time for the false report, but the financial execution was permanent, completely cut off from the Sullivan billions. He now works a miserable, entry-level retail job, drowning in the massive legal debt tied to the ruined marriage he rushed into. The community that once attended their lavish parties completely erased them from their memories. The aesthetic empire was nothing but dust. A few weeks ago, a handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox, stamped from the state correctional facility. The handwriting belonged to Erica. The ink was smudged, filled with pathetic, manipulative guilt-tripping. She wrote that she was still my mother, that they only did it for the family, that I needed to forgive them to heal my own heart. I held the cheap paper in my calloused hands. I did not feel a single ounce of anger or sorrow. I dropped the unopened envelope straight into the heavy-duty paper shredder in my office. The blades chewed through the manipulation in seconds. Total. Absolute indifference is the ultimate victory. My life is no longer defined by the shadows of a catering tent. Sunday afternoons are now spent at the firehouse, surrounded by the smell of barbecue and the sound of genuine pays. Unfiltered laughter. I am surrounded by people who have pulled me out of burning buildings. People who know my flaws and trust me with their lives. We built a family on a foundation of shared sacrifice, not biological accidents. The peace I feel now is deep, quiet, and completely unbreakable. Walking away from the people who share your blood is the hardest decision you will ever make. But there are 3 absolute rules you must understand to survive the fallout. Rule number 1. Blood is a biological accident. Loyalty is a conscious choice. Society will try to convince you that you owe your parents your sanity simply because they gave you life. But true family is not defined by DNA. True family is the 50 brothers and sisters who will kick down the heavy oak doors, lock down the perimeter, and stand shoulder to shoulder with you when the world tries to make you feel small. You have the absolute right to build your own family from the ashes of the old one. Rule number 2. Narcissists weaponize your silence. Toxic people rely on your desire to keep the peace. They steal, they manipulate, and they abuse, fully expecting you to stay quiet to avoid a public scene. But the peace you are keeping is only funding your own destruction. The moment you stop crying, start documenting, and expose their actions to the harsh light of legal and financial reality. Their power evaporates completely. Never protect the reputation of someone who is actively trying to destroy yours. Rule number 3. Never shrink yourself to fit at a table built on lies. The caterer's tent was meant to be a prison. They wanted me to hide my authentic, gritty reality so their fake, purchased identities could shine. But choosing to walk out of that tent, choosing to expose the rot beneath the orchids, was total liberation. You must be willing to let their fake empire burn to the ground to save yourself. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. Have you ever had to choose your dignity over your DNA? Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic table and build a new family from the ground up? Share your story in the comments below. Like and subscribe to join a community of survivors who refuse to stay in the shadows. Remember, the hardest fires to survive are the ones lit by the people who were supposed to keep you warm. Hold the line. And never look back. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are wondering how Natalie could just stand there in that sweltering catering tent, taking the sheer disrespect from her parents and her sister. Why did she wait so long to drop the hammer? Why did she not just start yelling the second Courtney deliberately spilled that dark red wine on her dress? To understand her silence, we have to talk about the slot machine effect. In psychology, this is known as intermittent reinforcement. Toxic families are absolute masters at this game. They do not abuse you 100% of the time. Every now and then, they give you a crumb of validation, a rare compliment, an invitation to a high society wedding. You keep pulling the lever, taking the emotional hits, hoping that this time, you finally hit the jackpot of genuine parental love. Natalie was not weak or stupid for enduring it. She was conditioned to hope. But the moment she recognized the manipulation, she stopped playing their game and started planning her exit. Let us break down the street-smart financial moves Natalie made to absolutely dismantle that toxic dynamic. Move number 1 is the audit strategy. Trevor thought he was an untouchable genius for forging a power of attorney while Natalie was deployed off the grid. But scammers, especially desperate family members, always get sloppy. Natalie did not confront him in the hallway with her hurt feelings. Feelings can be gaslit and manipulated. She confronted him with an airtight timeline. She used a forensic accountant to match a fraudulent notary stamp directly against her official federal deployment logs. Scammers hate details, and timestamps simply do not lie. Move number 2 is the buyout. Marcus, the arrogant groom, rushed to sign the marriage certificate exactly 1 hour before the ceremony without a prenuptial agreement. He wanted to flex his absolute dominance and project unshakable trust. Natalie let him do it. She waited until the legal ink was completely dry to expose the $100,000 federal wire fraud. By waiting, she legally tethered his pristine billionaire trust fund directly to her sister's criminal liability. She forced the grandfather to legally sever Marcus on the spot to protect his own empire. She did not just ruin a wedding aesthetic, she permanently liquidated their financial standing. Here is the ultimate verdict you need to walk away with today. Your dignity is worth infinitely more than a seat at a table built on financial manipulation and emotional abuse. Blood might explain your history, but it does not dictate your destiny. Sunk costs apply to relationships. 2. Do not spend another 10 years of your life trying to win the approval of people who view you as a commodity. True wealth is the freedom to walk out those heavy oak doors and never look back. Have you ever had to audit your own relationships or cut off a toxic family member to protect your peace and your bank account? Share your story in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more real talk on how to protect your mind, your money, and your absolute self-worth. I will see you in the next one.